All right, so as I was saying, Winston Churchill was certainly a character, and he was one of the few that did not, you know, believe Hitler. Um, in fact, Churchill, in a parliamentary address, um, Churchill said that as a child he had gone to the circus, and when he was filled with fascination because he wanted to see this freak at the circus called the Boneless Wonder. But his mother had prohibited him from seeing this hideous attraction. So Churchill announced to a parliament who was all hollering at him and everything that with great pleasure uh, his great pleasure at finally getting the opportunity to see the boneless wonder. And of course, he was referring to Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. And Churchill was, like I said, though, was still a lone voice crying in the wilderness. I mean, everybody agreed, not everybody, obviously, but most people agreed with Neville Chamberlain. So, it's easy to kind of make him look really bad now. One of, he concluded, Churchill concluded his speech when he was dogging out Chamberlain there. He says, quote, "And do not suppose that this is the end. This is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first sip of a bitter cup which will be proffered to us year by year, unless, by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor, we arise again and take our stand for freedom as in the olden time." And of course, he was right. Hitler invades the rest of Czechoslovakia. Now, what really makes that kind of, I guess, special is that for the first time, Hitler invaded an area, a territory that was not German speaking. And obviously this is a big deal because each time, for example, when he invaded Austria, when he took over the Sudetenland, when he reoccupied the Rhineland, these were German. The Rhineland was part of Germany. I mean, Austria was German speaking. The Sudetenland was full of Germans. They're called Sudeten Germans. If you go hang out in Prague, for example, one day, you'll find that a lot of people, even though Prague is very much part of, I mean, it's in the center. I mean, it's not part of the Sudetenland, but a lot of Czechs also speak German. And so in 1939, um, March 15th, to be exact, Hitler invaded and conquered the rest of Czechoslovakia. And thanks to Chamberlain and the other Allied leaders, Czechoslovakia would suffer a hellish existence under the Nazis, and then later on under the communists, under Soviet control. The vibrant Czech democracy would not be restored until a full half century later, when the Cold War ended. But at least this time the Allies took some action. All right. Chamberlain had to admit that his policy of appeasement had failed. On March 31st, he announced a mutual defense pact between Britain, France, and Poland. Chamberlain warned that if Hitler attacked Poland, Britain and France would declare war against Germany. Not surprisingly, Hitler did not take Chamberlain seriously, and he demanded the return of the free port of Danzig. This was taken from Germany under the Treaty of Versailles, as well as German control of a railroad and highway which passed through the Polish corridor. There was an area in northern, I don't have a map, but you can find it in sort of what we would consider northern Poland now, that was part of Germany, but was separated by Poland. He wanted to connect East Prussia with the rest of Germany. Now, the Nazi Soviet Non-Aggression Pact of 1939 really surprised everybody because Stalin, it was always, and Hitler were sort of arch enemies, but and in terms of political ideology, communism and fascism are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Even though really what the Soviet Union had under Stalin was not true communism in the old Marxist sense, but nonetheless, this is something that really kind of surprised everybody. And basically, they said that, well, we're gonna, Germany's like, look, we're gonna eventually invade Poland, and if we do so, we can divide it up. I mean, you can invade on the other side, and we can invade on this side, and we could pretty much divide Poland between us. Now, Hitler, never had any intention of really, you know, of had no intention of really staying with this non-aggression pact forever. I mean, he eventually wanted to invade Russia. In fact, he even called Stalin a hell of a fellow, and that when he conquered Russia, he wanted to keep Stalin as a ruler because he said no one knew how to handle the Russian people better than Stalin. Between 1939 and 1941, Stalin provided Hitler with beef, grain, other materials necessary to the conquest of Europe. He even allowed German warships to refuel at the Soviet Union's Arctic bases. He also closed down the embassies of Nazi-occupied countries. Having secured Stalin's goodwill through the non-aggression pact, Hitler was ready to invade Poland. And in September of 1939, he unleashed his Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, something that French General Charles de Gaulle had proposed in the 1930s, but the French army had completely ignored him. The strategy involved massive air attacks on population and communication centers and ammunition dumps, while numerous tank divisions raced ahead of the infantry, cutting supply lines and spreading confusion in the enemy's rear. Now, the thing about, I'm not a military historian. I was in the Army for a little while, and I wasn't a very good soldier because I'd lose my helmet all the time. But if you do study military history, what you'll notice is that speed is what is really makes a difference in terms of innovation. So in other words, one of the things that made Napoleon a little bit different at that time was speed. The way he was able to get from point A to point B in a much faster time. And that's also with the Blitzkrieg. I mean, what some people sort of look at Germany's army at this time in 1939 and their tactics as really, I don't want to say it's like the first modern tactics. In fact, people will go all the way back and look at Grant and during the U.S. Civil War and say like this is sort of the first modern war. But certainly there's a big difference when you look at the tactics that were employed during World War I and the tactics employed during World War II. And what we often see today is in the U.S. military when we, for example, invaded Iraq. It was a sort of a type of blitzkrieg in a way. So within just a few weeks, Germany had taken over much of Poland. In fact, Stalin was like, hey, wait, don't forget us. We want to take over some of that land as well. And they did so, and they pretty much divided it amongst themselves. As a result, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany. And that was the beginning of World War II. So I hope this helps a little bit. Use this and then look at some other resources if you can on the internet. The textbook is not going to go into that much detail, but I want you to be able to write an essay on the causes of World War II and just give examples of aggression and appeasement for the final. And so I'm going to post the final tomorrow and give you a few days. If you don't want to take it tomorrow, you can take it the next day. All right? Good luck. Do well.